Friends, I am thrilled to welcome to our Justice Matters YouTube channel Tristan Snell, who is the author of a book with an intriguing title, Taking Down Trump, which is something that I'm going to take a flyer and say 3/4 of the American population would like to see happen, and not just on the civil front, but on the criminal front. But first of all, Tristan, welcome.
Thanks, Glenn. I'm really happy to be here.
Can you tell everybody a little bit about your background, and then what is it that landed you at the New York State Attorney General's office that
Yep.
gave you the opportunity, I would say the pleasure and perhaps the honor of trying to hold Trump accountable for some of his misdeeds?
So I'm clerking for a federal judge in Brooklyn for a year, and then started looking around for government enforcement roles that I could potentially land. And luckily ended up at the Consumer Protection Bureau at the New York AG's office, which was definitely one of my top choice places to go. And got very, very lucky that just they happened to give me the Trump case my second day at the office. I think a lot of it was probably it was like, wow, he seems like he's drinks too much coffee and he's kind of loud. Maybe he'll have the energy to do something on this. But I think a lot of it was just like, he's the new guy. Stick him with the case that stuck. That's pretty much what happened. I really think I was the new guy, and the Trump case wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't like they were coming in with a preconceived notion of let's go get Donald Trump. This was back in 2011, and it was part of an initiative that the AG's office was doing regarding for-profit education in general. There were a number of other cases that we were pursuing at that same time. The Trump case had kind of gotten stuck because of Trump stonewalling. We didn't really get much evidence back out of his subpoena, out of the responses to the subpoena that we sent. So I got lucky enough to get handed that case on my second day at the office. Took it from there, and it was a lot of hard work and a lot of things that at the time we weren't sure what was going to happen with it.
So let me ask you this. Take the viewers back to your second day on the job, when your supervisor walks in with an opportunity to excel. That's what we used to call it back in the an opportunity for you to excel. We've got this little case involving possible fraud at the Trump University. What goes through your mind, if you can take us back there?
I think the first case that they handed me the day before, I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting, but it wasn't very high profile. This one comes in and I'm thinking this could be high profile, but good God, who went like Trump University? Like that was a thing. I hadn't heard about it when it was a thing. I thought there was an opportunity there, but then they were also kind of trying to pour a bucket of cold water on it by saying like, look, we don't even know if there's a case here. Your first job is to go figure out if there is a case. I wasn't exactly, jumping up and down thinking this was a super great opportunity. Little did I know. I knew that we had this case against the big banks, and I was kind of wondering when I was going to get to be involved in that. I don't know if I knew what to expect. Then I locked myself in my office for about 6 weeks. And boy, oh boy, I mean, I was not ready for what was going to happen next. I start calling these people up. And these are all people who had gone to Trump University classes. And a lot of them had lost a lot of money there. And just asked them, introduced myself and asked them, what happened? Can you tell me about your experience? Not a leading question, an open-ended question. People cried, people ranted, people screamed, people went at me being like, are you actually from the New York AG's office? How do I know? I was like, look, you can call this number and they'll put you through on the switchboard. This is legit. I'm not trying to scam you. It was for an hour more often than not that people would talk to me, and I was not really doing much of the talking. This was just asking a couple of simple questions, and people were pouring their guts out. And the amount of embarrassment, mortification, anger, shame, like rage, just up and sadness. People lost their life savings. They lost their nest eggs. People lost their homes. They were in crippling credit card debt, and they thought no one, and this is key, they thought no one would ever do anything.
And there's something very gratifying and motivating when you get to work with victims, particularly if they feel like they've been left behind. Nobody cares about what happened to them.
That's right.
Tell the viewers a little bit about the number of victims ultimately when you tallied it all up, the amount of fraud and then we're going to save some of the happy ending stuff for later.
Yep. So it was about 6,000 people that had lost money in the scheme, mostly over a 3-year period from 2007 to 2010. It was about $42 million in gross revenue. And Donald Trump made an estimated $5 million personally in profit from Trump University, having put in an initial investment of about $2 million.
You're talking to these victims. They're pouring their heart out. They're probably extremely grateful that somebody's listening to their tale and their experience and their victimization. And so moving forward, how do you go about beginning to investigate this and put a case together?
First and foremost, we needed to make sure that we had some approval and some cover from upstairs. And anybody who's worked in government obviously knows how this goes. Even if you just know it from watching, things like The Wire, it's like, yes, there is a chain of command, and yes, you have to follow it, and you've got to go pitch what you're doing upstairs. For us, that meant going up to the executive floor, and we presented our findings. And that was sort of the first big moment where I was like, okay, now I'm up talking to like the big folks upstairs. And we were basically told, okay, keep going. So we had cover from them. It meant that we were able to also then get them to approve third-party subpoenas. So we were able to branch out and then go to all of Trump's vendors and other partners that had worked with them on this. That was critical because Trump was stonewalling us, but he outsourced virtually everything. So as a result, we were able to go get the HR records because that was a third party, the background checks because that was a third party, critically the transcriptions of some of the seminar sessions. We were able to get those from a third party. That was a big moment. We needed to corroborate the victim testimony. That was really the key. So we had the victims there. Of the 100 people I talked to, we ended up getting, I think, something around 50 to 60 affidavits out of that when all was said and done. They were willing to put together with me a sworn statement summarizing what they had told me and signing it under penalty of perjury, signing it under oath. So we had a lot of victim testimony, but then it was going to be a they said, he said situation. So we needed to corroborate that. We needed to figure out who was telling the truth. Was it the victims or was it Trump and his lawyers with them saying that nothing had gone wrong and that they ultimately ended up trying to paint the victims as a bunch of losers, which is just horrifying. But that's what they did. It was just, these are a bunch of folks who couldn't hack it. They tried to be real estate investors coming out of Trump University and they failed. And rather than own the responsibility, they're coming to us, as opposed to no, everything about Trump University was a lie and a bait and switch and an upsell, and that's what really happened.
Now, I know you said your first meeting with the higher ups, they were supportive and they said go and keep working. And
at the time, yes,
but it wasn't always that way. As I read through the book, you had to sometimes fight through your own supervisors to keep moving in the direction of justice.
The supervisors for me, thankfully, we were all aligned. That was great. So my division chief on down, we were all in alignment there. And I later learned that even some of the people up on the executive floor that we thought were skeptical were actually not. A lot of it was to win over the AG at the time, Eric Schneiderman. That was really the big battle. I talk about it in great detail in the book. A lot of this is stuff that has never come out before, sort of the inside story of how we almost never brought a case. It almost died many, many, many times. Or it could have gotten done for a relatively paltry settlement, except that Trump actually didn't jump at that, which is crazy. He could have settled that case for a tiny fraction of what he ultimately paid, and he didn't, and he blew it. He blew a great opportunity there. So much for being such a master deal maker.
So I want to talk a little bit about the resistance you encountered, but I want to read one passage from your book, which is disheartening, though perhaps not entirely shocking, but disheartening to this old career prosecutor. You talk about how Trump managed to get away with so much for so long. And then I read this passage, which breaks my heart, though I don't disagree with you. You say Trump, managed to get an entire generation of otherwise high-powered New York City prosecutors tucked away in his pocket, softened up with donations, co-opted with the promise of future donations, bullied into passivity. How do you contend with the reality that is what feels like kind of a corrupt system?
It's a really big problem that I don't know that I would want to get rid of entirely. Like, right, do we really want to have none of these people be elected? I think you can go back and forth about that, but the fact that so many of them does give an entry point for mischief. And that's exactly what somebody like Donald Trump is good at exploiting. And so, for a long, long time, he was able to prevent justice from happening to him by managing to make cases never appear in the first place. That's the easiest way to win a prosecution, is for it never to be brought. And that's what he was able to do for about 40 years there. He first faced a government enforcement action in 1973. We sued him in the Trump University case in 2013. 40 years went by, and he really didn't face hardly anything during that time period, despite lots of chatter about things that he was up to, possible criminal activity, or at least that he was adjacent to criminal activity, and nothing ever happened to him during that time. And certainly there was a lot of what he did that would have qualified as, that definitely should have been gone after, as consumer fraud. And honestly, somebody should have been going after Trump University way before we did. But I don't think people realized how bad it was. And I honestly don't think that we devote enough resources to fighting consumer fraud. But that's a different story. Part of what the book is about is showing how we, the people, we have our own entry points into the system. There are ways where you can change the dynamic as a citizen or as a government employee, where you can potentially change that dynamic for the better and actually shift it so that it tilts in the favor of actually going after one of these big cases rather than in leaving it alone. Yeah. And it's a really, really delicate dynamic, but we've got to open the curtain behind that to see how it works, because otherwise we who care about justice and accountability are not going to be able to make it happen.
I think what the term you used was excessive caution, and I think that's a nice way to put it. I think timidity is also a fair way to put it. There's a powerful incentive, and you say it in the book, for prosecutors to just sort of take the sure wins, right?
Yep.
So this was not a sure win, the way you describe the hurdles and the roadblocks and the really nefarious actors that Donald Trump surrounds himself with. So I want to ask you about one point in the book and in the history of the case where you talk about how you were trying to get discovery. You're trying to get documents out of Donald Trump and Trump University, and you're entitled to them under the discovery process, but they're stonewalling you. So you finally take the legal step and file a motion to compel. Just explain to the viewers, what is a motion to compel? And please tell them what happened next, because when I read it in your book, my blood pressure spiked.
So a motion to compel is basically a request to the court to actually say, look, the subpoena was issued, you actually have to follow it. A subpoena is basically a demand. And then you going to the court to say, let's have you, judge, you're effectively going to co-sign this subpoena effectively, and say, no. I'm turning it into an even bigger demand. The demand is not now just from the Attorney General's office or from the opposing party. The demand is now coming from me with the force of a court order. We would have probably won that motion to compel. I think we wouldn't have won everything. The way these things usually work, as you know, Glenn, is that you're not necessarily going to get everything you ask for from the court. They'll find ways to trim it a little bit and give you not everything that you were looking for, to try to be fair. But we were asking for basically just our subpoena to be, it was a relatively reasonable subpoena. It was comprehensive and whatnot, but they were giving us out of, it was something like 28 different categories, if I recall correctly. I think there were about 15 of them where they had given us zero or almost nothing. And then there were some where they had given us way less than we thought really existed. And we believed that they were holding back on us. And they were. And we finally got our office to say, look, we're going to go ahead and pick that fight and try to see if we can get more documents out of them. We were able to make our case without them giving us more documents. We actually had, because we gotten all this third party material, we had a really amazing case. The reason why we wanted to do it was just for the sake of thoroughness and comprehensiveness. And also because the folks upstairs, and it was really coming from Schneiderman, were telling us, well, you don't have enough, you don't have enough, you don't have enough, which was their way of kicking it back down to us and ensuring that the case would never see the light of day. So finally, our division chief called them out on it and said, well, if we don't have enough, why don't you let us do a motion to compel? And finally, they were like, okay, fine, we'll let you do the motion to compel. So we drafted up, we sent it in, and then the next day, I get called into my bureau chief's office, and she's like, they made us pull it back. We had to withdraw it. And we were just gobsmacked, just totally floored. And Glenn, you know this. It's like, that does not happen.
No.
That does not happen. You don't withdraw a motion after you filed it when you're the government. Like, that is just not something that ever happens. And not only that we withdrew, it's like, why? Okay, well, what the hell happened? It was because Trump's people had gone, his lawyers had gone berserk and started calling everybody in the office, and they had gotten to Schneiderman. And basically they said, we've been blindsided. This is not fair. We needed to have a chance to reply, blah, blah, blah. Never mind the fact that we had sent them, I don't know, it was probably like 4 different formal demand letters asking to follow up on our subpoena. We probably had another 5 other phone calls with them where the guy basically, yelled and screamed at us and then kind of promised that he would keep looking. And then maybe we'd get like a DVD with another 10,000 pages of garbage. They had plenty of chances, but never mind that. They yelled and kicked and screamed, and they got their way. They had basically bullied us into pulling it back and not doing it. There was a guy in our bureau who had been in our bureau for 50 years. And he said he could not think of any point at which the office had humiliated itself like that. They'd never seen anything like it.
When I read that, Tristan, if I learned anything about leadership and about supervising others, I learned it in the Army and the 3 rules of supervision: support your people, and support your people. And when I read that the Attorney General Schneiderman basically cut your legs out from under you in really the most embarrassing way possible, that is just infuriating.
Yeah, so that was, we thought the case was dead.
Justice matters. Justice matters. Justice matters.